Fishing Intelligence, a fishing improvement podcast for the modern angler. What's up, guys? Welcome to another week of the Fishing Intelligence podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Jasonic, and this week we're talking with Brian McCarty out of Martha's Vineyard. Brian is an avid fisherman. He is a guide for the island. He does surf fishing charters under the title Major League Surf Casting. He's also knowledgeable about all other aspects of fishing on the island. He goes out in boats. He does live bait fishing, lure fishing, shore fishing, fly fishing, anything out there. You name it, he does it. He's going to drop some knowledge for us today on how the Derby went, the Martha's Vineyard Derby, and also just kind of talk to us about striper fishing in general, their migration, where you can find the holdovers, and what the hot bite is right now. So, Brian, thanks so much for being on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So it seems like you've been pretty crazy busy lately. What's been going on out in Martha's Vineyard?
Well, let's see. We had a really good bass season, really good season for Atlantic bonito and also false albacore. And then obviously I try to do as many competitions as I can. And September 8th, I got married to the love of my life. And September 9th started the Martha's Vineyard Bass and Bluefish Derby. So it was 5 weeks of fishing madness, 24 hours a day.
Right after getting married too. That's quite the crazy transition there, huh?
It really was. Everybody said, what are you going to do? Are you going to go on a honeymoon? Are you going to fish? And we stuck around and I fished the Derby.
That's awesome. So explain what the Derby is to somebody who has no idea, because I didn't know until I came out there and fished with you guys on the tour. So yeah, just give a quick explanation of it.
So the Martha's Vineyard Derby was established in 1946, and the concept of the Derby was to prolong the tourist season and raise some money for the community. And so they have 4 species of fish: the false albacore, Atlantic bonito, the bluefish, and the striped bass. And basically a whole bunch of prizes get ponied up, and the largest fish total basically wins the Derby. And there's lots of different categories, so you can do that from the boat division, the shore division, the fly rod division. They've also added a women's division, a junior and a mini junior division for kids. And essentially they give out daily, weekly, and overall prizes.
Very cool. So it's split by style of fishing. So each fish has its own, you can catch certain fish for certain style, or any fish from a certain style.
So it has to be one of those 4 species, and they give out the daily, weekly, and overall prizes, but it's not a cumulative score. It's basically like the biggest fish wins. So for example, each day they give out a first, second, and third prize for the biggest fish of the day, and then for the week, obviously, first, second, third biggest fish overall, and the same thing for the overall biggest fish. And then the prizes are actually pretty amazing. So not only do they give out the daily prizes per category, but the grand fish, which is the overall biggest fish of each category, they have a 1 in 4 shot of winning a Cape Codder boat or a Subaru Forester car. So for example, if you were fishing from the boat and you had one of those 4 species, you get to pick a key from a bucket and basically have an opportunity to try it in a lock. And if it opens the lock, then the boat guys would win the car, or the shore guys would win the boat.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. Some high stakes there for sure. That's crazy.
It's really awesome. They give out hundreds of thousands of dollars in prizes, but unfortunately with that, you'll always have those people that want to exploit the competition, or they want to cheat. So there's a lot of rules. A lot of it is code of conduct type things, like if you get caught trespassing on somebody's property, you can be disqualified from the Derby, or any type of tampering with the weight of a fish. They take it very, very seriously. In fact, when you sign up for the Derby, there's a line in there that says that you could be polygraphed to ensure that your fish is a legitimate catch.
Wow. So cheating's been like a pretty big issue in the past. Is it getting better now? Or are people just getting more creative?
I would hope that it's getting better and that people are not getting more creative, but there have been incidences that have caused people to be banned for life.
Wow.
So there's a committee, which I'm part of, that has to hear each case individually, and they really pride themselves in taking it seriously and really, trying to examine all sides of the situation to make sure that, there's no malicious activity during the Derby.
Yeah, wouldn't want to be exploiting any of the natural resources, especially with how amazing the fishing is out there. I mean, that was from the tour, that was probably, as I've said before, the most intense fishing spot that we went on out of all 30 something locations. It was just, you guys are a whole nother breed of fishermen out there. It's nonstop. We fished 24 hours straight. I've never done that in my life. So definitely props to you guys for having something and knowing how to use it and enjoy it, because it's incredible out there. How did you do personally in the Derby?
So I finished first place in the fly rod shore striped bass division. So in other words, I had the biggest striped bass caught on a fly rod from the shore.
Impressive.
Which was really awesome. I've never finished that well in the Derby before. And to be honest with you, I didn't even use the fly rod too hard during the Derby. So I just had one night where the bait was so thick that I didn't think I was going to get the fish any other way. So I raced back to the car and grabbed the fly rod, and had a number of good sized fish on it. So right time, right place, right tools.
Yeah, very cool. And what fly are they normally eating? Like Clouser imitations or topwater? What were you catching them on?
So it's interesting because when you talk to the fly rod guys, the diehard fly guys will tell you that there's only a couple patterns to throw and everything else is just kind of being fancy. So out here, a Clouser will work. Any of the mesh sand eels, I'm not sure if the freshwater guys use the mesh sand eels, but it's basically like a mesh tube that's tied at both ends. So it looks kind of like a long, skinny bait fish. And then actually there's some new materials that I believe Orvis put them out, where it's kind of a dragon tail or something that elongates the fly.
Yeah,
and
I've seen those.
Pretty much anything is going to work. They don't really care what you throw at them as long as you get it in front of them. And on that particular night, I was actually using a combination of a sand fly and a Clouser, so it was kind of like the Clouser hair towards the back with that mesh tubing up over the front.
Is that one that you tied yourself, or was it a store one?
No, it was definitely something I tied myself. I try not to buy any flies, and if I do, it's generally because I like the pattern and I want to mimic it myself. And ironically, it was on a bamboo fly rod that I had just made myself too. I recently found a bamboo rod blank maker in the United States, and so I had ordered one and just finished assembling it, and it was the first time I actually took it out and caught fish on it, so I'm glad that it didn't crumble.
That's a pretty special way to break a rod in.
Yeah, it was really cool. I'm very excited about it, and actually I have a 5-weight and a 10-weight fly rod that are or the blanks for them anyway, that I'll be creating in the next week or two, hopefully.
So that's what you're up to now. Now that the Derby's passes, you're just kind of in recoup mode. Is that the idea?
The fish are still here, and sometimes late fall can be even the best fishing. You'll be driving down the road and look out at the water, and you can just see a massive school of like false albacore feeding. But after the Derby, everybody has been fishing pretty much every waking moment they possibly can for 5 weeks. So it is recoup mode. I've already taken the rods out of my car and already started cleaning up. So usually the day after the Derby ends is where everybody really starts straightening out their gear. And, most people will stop fishing completely. For me, I guess it's just a matter of like reorganizing before I start back out on the water.
Yeah, I know you, and you're not going to stay off the water for too long.
I usually won't. For me, generally, I'll fish maybe a day or two a week while the migratory fish are still in season. And then after that, we go out on the ponds where we'll search for any of the holdover fish or even get back into freshwater fishing.
So explain like the migratory versus the holdover fish, because I'm not familiar with striped bass at all. So like when are the migration times? Where's the best spot to like find migrating fish, and then how do you locate holdovers?
That's a really good question, Jake. So the striped bass generally they come from the Chesapeake Bay area, and that's where they breed. And in the spring, usually around April, generally the end of April for Martha's Vineyard is when we'll start seeing the striped bass. And they'll move with the bait and the warm weather. Basically, they'll follow the temperature breaks. So they'll in turn leave in the fall, and usually they'll leave in November. And again, that's based on how much bait is around and the temperatures of the water. So I guess to answer your question, where is the best place to find them? At least here on Martha's Vineyard, it's generally the South Shore. And close to the mouth of like our estuary openings. So we have a lot of like brackish ponds and little coves that are exposed to the salt water of the Atlantic Ocean, and usually that's where the bait accumulates and goes to. So usually that's a good place to start looking for them.
Got it. Very cool. And is that also where you can find like holdover fish, or the holdovers year round? You can always find some fish on the island.
So it's interesting because Martha's Vineyard is a little bit different from the rest of New England in the fact that some of our estuaries are brackish water, and because the brackish water that we have at least is it's landlocked. So in other words, if there's a high tide, the salt water will spill into the freshwater ponds that are divided basically by like a stretch of sand or beach or some type of like a land body. And so that water doesn't go stagnant. They have to take a machine out there and manually breach the opening of the pond to circulate the water so that it doesn't that the pond doesn't build up with nitrates or stagnant water that starts ruining the land. So what'll happen is where most of New England has holdovers. So, for example, if a power plant is using like a water cooling system, it'll actually heat up the water in the saltwater areas. And the term holdover basically means that instead of migrating again, the bass will kind of linger in those warm temperature spots. Here on Martha's Vineyard, I've started using the term captive bass, meaning that once they manually opened the ponds up and the fish swim in basically to eat the bait. And once it closes again, the fish are stuck in there. So basically we've got these migratory striped bass that go into the pond for food and they get stuck all winter. And it's a pretty awesome opportunity to, take advantage of catching some fish in the brackish ponds.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wouldn't have realized anything about like the opening of brackish areas to help like better the environment. That's pretty fascinating.
Well, so, I don't know if that necessarily betters the environment. In fact, like from an environmental standpoint, to have these hot water spots that are keeping the fish around, I kind of see it as like interfering with their migratory patterns. Okay. As a fisherman, it's nice that they linger there and that I can fish for them all winter. But I think that, sometimes the numbers in the population are kind of affected by that too, by businesses that either, are warming the water or, it could even be in some cases, I guess, pollution that's, decomposing and warming the water. So it's not necessarily a good thing, but it is kind of a convenient thing, to the fisherman that's out there trying to catch the fish out of season.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you cleared that up. You're restricting migratory fish, so I'm sure that doesn't help populations for the most part. But going back to the Derby, you're talking about fishing for 5 weeks in a row. What kind of gear is able to hold up to 5 weeks of saltwater fishing? Because I know I've only done it for maybe not even a week at a time, and I'm always ending up like having to just really go in and blast my reels because they'll start to tighten up, or I'll have, my lines getting destroyed all the time. So like what gear makes it through 5 weeks, or is it just repair after repair and replace and do it again?
I'll tell you what, that's probably my biggest challenge is the fact that no matter what type of gear it is, it's going to break over time, especially being exposed to salt water, harsh weather. And most people will take a piece of equipment and maybe use it once or twice a week, but to use it, 18 to 20 hours a day for weeks on end, pretty much everything is bound to break. And for me personally, I like to, go for the equipment that, seems like it'll endure the best, but more so the companies that support a really good guarantee or a really good warranty. So any of the rods that I'm using, I try to get sealed bearings, and that way it can be directly dunked into salt water and not corrode. When it comes to like waders and wading jackets and things like that, I know that Guy Cotton has really good warranties, and they have nice thick material that helps keep me warm, especially like as the fall weathers move in. But honestly, one of my biggest struggles is actually to find a good surf casting bag or some type of like carrier for all my tackle. So that's kind of been one of my biggest frustrations lately is, finding a gear company that like puts out a bag that kind of suits my needs.
Sounds like there could be a potential spot to fill in the industry there for heavy duty surf fishermen.
There definitely is a huge void to be filled, in regarding like lure bags or any type of tackle bags. But that's also one of the reasons why I try to either make or modify a lot of my gear just to kind of, benefit the purposes that I need them for specifically. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I made my bamboo fly rod. And I also do a lot of jigs and my own flies, and basically anything that I can make or modify myself, I do.
So is this like the time that you're taking now, is that also going into getting new lures ready, tying up new flies, or is it just all organization?
My car right now, most people wouldn't want to ride in it. Usually it smells like rotting bait, and there's all sorts of sharp hooks and things that are like lying around in the car. Not to mention just piles of gear, whether it's at the front door of the house or, in the back of my truck. Those are the things that I try to organize. But as far as any of the equipment that I actually fish with, I kind of have certain numbers of things that I'll use. So, for example, the bucktail jig, I know that I need certain sizes and certain colors. So as far as like producing anything new, it's more or less to replace the gear that I've either damaged or broken or lost, like among the time that I spent during the Derby. So it's not like I'm getting creative and inventing new things. It's more or less just replacing things that I've, put a lot of wear and tear on.
So now that you're off of the water, how do you develop your fishing? Because you're obviously on the water so often and getting all this information. So how do you use that while you're off the water to then better yourself?
Jake, that was one of the main reasons why I was interested in Angler, being able to gather and collect my data and analyze it. And just the way that Angler allows me to examine like the aggregated data, that definitely helps me, as far as like my off the water game and my plans for, my trips and my time on the water. But much like you, I'm also a full-time college student, and I spend a lot of time and research with my schooling, just learning more about the local species and trying to understand the fisheries and the science behind the fishing.
That's just such a cool place to be in school on Martha's Vineyard. I mean, I don't know how many people who are listening have been there, but it's a whole nother world out there. It's beautiful.
It really is. And, I've done a lot of traveling. I've fished, I believe, in 41 countries now. And I love to go on the road in the off season, like, once the migration leaves in the fall. I try to venture out and fish in other places. And most of the time I have this realization that there's really no place like home. And I forget which magazine it was, but they rated Martha's Vineyard as like one of the top 10 fishing destinations in the world. Wow. And after the traveling that I've done and after the fish that I've caught and just knowing that there's so much opportunity on Martha's Vineyard to fish for saltwater species, and once they migrate south, then, pursue the brackish and freshwater species. There's just so much opportunity and versatility to really get out and explore and catch some great fish, no matter what time of day or what time of year it is.
So obviously there's good numbers of striper out there, but talk about the freshwater side of things out there a little bit.
So we have I believe it's the yellow perch, and we also have some good-sized pickerel, which I believe they're chain pickerel. We also have bass, largemouth, smallmouth, and the brook trout, which I know, you're a big fan of brook trout too, but there's been a really big desire from the local property owners and the local environmental management folks just to revive our whole brook trout population. And I'm sure that you noticed when you were out this summer, they've got these beautiful little freshwater streams that kind of trickle throughout the hills on the island. And it's just such a cool thing to do. It's funny for the people that might be listening that aren't out chasing brook trout. Yeah, they're tiny little fish, but they're just so cool and they're so exciting. And I really hope to see a lot more of the brook trout revival here on the island in the next few years.
And such a unique scenario to catch those fish in. I mean, you're on an island surrounded by salt water, catching massive striper, and here you are with a little 3-weight fly rod, tiny little flies, and you're pulling out hand-sized, beautiful, lit-up brook trout. That was just one of the things that blew my mind from that trip. We were out fishing for striper the whole time, and then all of a sudden, we're on some little freshwater stream catching brook trout. I would have never guessed that in a million years.
It is really an amazing thing, and they're small and they're fragile. And I know the brook trout we have here, they say that they can actually exit and enter through the mouth of the streams that enter out into salt water. So you wouldn't think that a freshwater brook trout would go out into the salt, but they had to get here somehow. And it's just such an interesting thing. It's a very unique and dynamic little environment they have going on just to be able to sustain their population here.
So we were talking a little bit before this, and I just wanted to talk about some of the Martha's Vineyard superstitions that you guys have, because nobody else on the tour really brought up any unique superstitions, but you guys brought up a couple of them. So why don't you run people through the superstitions out on the island, so if they were to visit, they know what to do and what not to do.
It's really hard to separate being OCD from superstition. When I hit the water, I want to make sure that I have my rods and I have the tackle and everything that I need, and it all needs to be organized perfectly. Otherwise, I might hike down the beach for a half a mile and then realize I forgot something. But we are very superstitious. In fact, you and I were talking about some of the bigger ones. So there's a surf caster, and I believe he's from New York, and his name's Bill Wetzel. And some time ago, they asked him about his superstitions, and he said, he loves Billy Joel as a musician, but when he hears Billy Joel on fishing days, he was guaranteed to get skunked. And, when I first heard this, I kind of thought that it was ridiculous and seemed really far out there. And of course, what happened, I was on my way out fishing, I hear Billy Joel, and I end up getting skunked. So I think when you spend so many hours a day on the water and you spend so many days consistently on the water, you start to notice all these little like intricate details. For example, like if I have a ham sandwich before I go fishing and then I catch a ton of fish,
you're going to start eating more ham sandwiches.
Yeah, exactly. So you start to notice like these patterns and things. So, at first I was laughing about the whole Billy Joel superstition, but then of course, like a number of times in a row, I noticed I'd hear Billy Joel and I'd get skunked. And it actually happened in reverse that my friend Corrigan Mello, you met Corey when you were here. He's, a very, very experienced boat captain, a fantastic fisherman. And he and I noticed that, this whole thing that Bill Wetzel was onto about Billy Joel was kind of weird and true. But then after being skunked for so long, we were listening to the radio and Bruce Springsteen came on. And as soon as Bruce Springsteen came on the radio, the fish started biting again. So it's interesting that we're superstitious that if you hear Billy Joel, you're probably going to get skunked. But after noticing a trend of, like Bruce Springsteen worked to bring the fish back, we kind of figured out how to reverse that superstition. So anytime we hear Billy Joel on the radio, we immediately have to, get on the phone and look up Bruce Springsteen and play a Bruce Springsteen track just to reverse that whole, negative.
Yeah, the negative energy.
Yeah, the negative energy from Billy Joel.
That's awesome. I like that one a lot. I'm gonna have to test that on bass fishing. I owe Corrigan too, because he was the one that pulled the hook out of my hand once I got it hooked and out there with you guys.
That's right, he did. Yeah, I'll have to tell him you said hi. And it's kind of extended to our fishing friends throughout New England. I got a call from my friend Rich on Nantucket, and he was fishing the Nantucket Inshore Classic. And when he was on his way out to the water, he said that he heard Bruce Springsteen come on the radio. So he gave me a call and told me, hey, I heard Bruce Springsteen. It's going to be a great fishing day. I just wanted to let you know. So I guess it's pretty contagious, too.
That's funny. I wonder if there's like any interesting studies on like the correlation between superstitions and confidence levels and then better performance, because I mean, whether they do something or not, it definitely puts you in a different mentality coming into something. It's like if your buddy knows you have a banana on the boat, then they're not going to be happy with you. They're probably going to be like a little off focus, and I wonder if there's any actual correlation there.
I think a lot of it is that at the end of the line, there's so many factors that play into how you're producing the bait, and your mentality and your physical ability kind of dictates what that's going to look like in the water. And I think to some degree, superstitions do play out as far as like how you carry yourself, how you work your line. And there's just so many of them, the banana on the boat thing, depending on like what music you're playing. I have friends that actually have certain songs that they need to listen to on their way out to fish. Like Stavros, who you met when you were here, Stavros Viglis, he likes to listen to the Kenny Loggins Highway to the Danger Zone when he's on his way out in the boat. And another big one for me too, actually the biggest one, is that when I leave the house, I have to, hear from my wife. She always wishes me a big fish, and when she doesn't, it's not even worth going.
Yeah, so, I remember that one. That was a big one.
Yeah, I always have to hear it. I always have her wish me a fish.
So we're coming up on time here, but let me get one more bit of information from you. If you had to pick a lure for this time of the year for striper fishing, what would your immediate go-to be?
Well, in regards to lures, it would definitely be the SP Minnow. I've actually found with striped bass, there's about 4 good ones that you could carry nothing but those 4 and probably do pretty well. So my number one would definitely be the SP Minnow. And I believe they make a 5 and a 7-inch, and I believe that it's Daiwa that actually makes them. Very universal. I've caught striped bass, false albacore, bluefish, and even bonito on them. Not to mention mahi and some other, just a variety of species. So I'm convinced that'll catch almost anything. Rebel also makes a jumping minnow, which is a topwater plug. It's got a rattle in it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but I also use those in bone white. They've been incredible. Also the bucktail, which I'm not sure if a lot of the freshwater guys are into bucktails. It's actually a fact that they put bucktails into a pilot survival kit because they're heavy, so they can throw in any type of weather. It's a jig. You can work the entire column from top to bottom based on your retrieve of, your line.
Yeah.
So that's a really good one, very universal. And the other one that I would definitely recommend guys use is the Sluggo, which I'm not sure the company that makes the Sluggo, but it's a stick bait, it's a soft bait, and very, very universal.
Thank you for those tips, and I'm sure if anybody's listening who's planning on going out striper fishing, I'm sure they'll be appreciating it too, because those were definitely the ones that we crushed them on when we were out there, so those are for sure the gems that'll work out there.
Yeah, you can definitely save a lot of money and just stick with those 4, and you should be all right.
Until you find a garage sale on the island, and then you have to buy a few more, right?
Yeah, that's funny that you said that, because I had a friend who found a store that was closing out, and he bought 2 dozen bags of soft plastics for me for like $8.
Wow, that's a deal.
You never know when you'll find, the giveaway or the deal of the century on tackle. But yeah, that's always an amazing, exciting thing.
Well, that's all the time that we have for this podcast. Brian, thanks so much for hopping on. It was a pleasure talking to you, catching up, and hearing about how it's been out on Martha's Vineyard.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jake, and I look forward to talking to you more.
Thank you guys so much for listening. Catch you next week. Fishing Intelligence, a fishing improvement podcast for the modern angler.